It was supposed to be just another night, just another drive home. But when those red and blue lights flashed behind me, everything changed. The cop was tall, broad-shouldered, and had a voice that sent chills down my spine. Then came the pat down. His hands were firm, deliberate, and when they went somewhere they shouldn't, I knew I was in trouble. But the real shock? I wasn't sure I wanted him to stop. I saw the lights before I heard the siren. Bright red and blue flashing in my rearview mirror, cutting through the darkness like a warning. I wasn't speeding, wasn't doing anything wrong, but that didn't change the fact that I was about to get pulled over. And considering the way my pulse hammered in my throat, maybe I wasn't as innocent as I thought. I exhaled slowly, pulled onto the shoulder, and put both hands on the wheel. Did everything by the book. But none of it mattered. Because the second I saw him step out of the cruiser, the second I really saw him, I forgot how to breathe. He was big, tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who commanded attention without even trying. His uniform fit snugly, highlighting every hard line of muscle beneath it. And when he took off his aviators, revealing the most intense blue eyes I had ever seen, I knew I was screwed. He stopped beside my window. I rolled it down, tried to act casual, and failed miserably. His gaze swept over me sharp, assessing. Then, in a voice so deep it sent a shiver down my spine, he said, "License and registration." I swallowed hard, fumbled for my wallet, hands shaking way more than they should have been. Because this wasn't just a traffic stop anymore. This was something else, something charged. And judging by the way his gaze lingered on me just a second too long, maybe he felt it too. I handed him my ID. He took it, didn't look away, didn't blink, just stood there, staring at me like he was trying to figure me out. Then, after an excruciating pause, he exhaled. "Step out of the car." My pulse spiked. "Excuse me?" His jaw tightened. "Step out." I hesitated, not because I was guilty, not because I was afraid, but because I had a feeling, a dangerous, reckless feeling that if I got out of this car, I wouldn't be the same when I got back in. I unbuckled my seatbelt, opened the door, and stepped out. He was even taller up close, even more intimidating, and when he looked down at me like he could see right through me, I knew I was in way over my head. His voice was lower this time, quieter. "Turn around." I licked my lips. "Why?" His gaze dropped to my mouth just for a second, then sharpened. I said, "Turn around." I did, felt the tension coil in my stomach as his presence moved in behind me. Felt his breath, warm against my neck, and when his hands landed on my waist, firm, unwavering, spreading heat through me like wildfire. I bit my lip, because this was wrong. This was dangerous. This was exactly what I wanted. I felt his hands before I heard his voice, strong, sure, moving over my sides with a deliberate slowness that made my breath catch. This wasn't just a routine search, not with the way his fingers pressed firm, lingering just a second too long, not with the way his body hovered so damn close behind me, heat rolling off him like a warning, or maybe like an invitation. Legs apart. The order was sharp, low, like he didn't just expect me to obey, he knew I would. And that should have pissed me off, should have made me roll my eyes, push back, but instead, I swallowed hard, exhaled slowly, and did exactly what he said. A pause, then, his breath near my ear. Good. I closed my eyes, because this wasn't happening. This wasn't real. It couldn't be, because no cop, no straight-laced, by-the-book cop did things like this, did things that felt like a test, like a challenge, like he wanted to see just how far he could push me before I cracked. His hands moved, lower, over my back, down my sides, and then a hesitation, brief, so quick I almost missed it. But I felt it, because for just a split second, he hesitated, and that was all the confirmation I needed. "You done?" I asked, my voice tight. He exhaled, didn't answer, just kept going, down my hips, over my thighs, slower this time, like he was thinking, like he was debating something bigger than just this moment. And then his hand slid just a little too far. A little too close. A little too. Oh, my stomach flipped. My fingers curled into fists. Because he knew. He had to know. Because no way in hell was that an accident. Not with the way he lingered. Not with the way his fingers tensed like he was fighting something. Something he shouldn't want. Something he wasn't ready to admit. Something me. I turned my head slightly. Just enough to catch the edge of his jaw. Strong. Clenched. Like he was barely keeping himself in check. And when I whispered, "That where you meant to touch, officer?" his whole body went rigid. But he didn't pull away. Didn't deny it. Didn't do a damn thing except breathe too hard. Too fast. Too much. And that was enough. Because he wanted this. He wanted me. And now we both knew it. Then, finally, he stepped back, cleared his throat, and in a voice that sounded just a little too forced, he said, "You're free to go." I turned slowly, met his gaze. His hands were on his belt now, fingers flexing like he was still trying to shake off what just happened. Like he was still feeling it. And when I smiled slow, knowing his jaw tightened, I licked my lips, took a step closer, not enough to touch, but enough to see the way his pupils blew wide. Enough to know this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I tilted my head, lowered my voice. "See you around, officer." Then I got in my car, pulled away and left him standing there, watching, breathing too hard, looking at me like he didn't just start something he wasn't ready to finish. Like he knew I'd be waiting. I didn't expect to see him again. Not so soon. Not like this. But when I walked into that bar 3 nights later, when I saw him leaning against the counter, drink in hand, eyes locked onto mine the second I stepped inside, I knew this wasn't over. Not even close. He looked different out of uniform, less controlled, less rigid. His black t-shirt stretched over broad shoulders, sleeves rolled up just enough to show the veins in his forearms. His jaw was freshly shaved, and his blue eyes darker now. Daring watched me like he was waiting to see if I'd run, if I'd pretend he hadn't touched me the way he did that night. But I wasn't running. I wasn't pretending. So I smirked, walked straight to the bar, straight to him. "Officer." His lips twitched. "You remember me. Hard to forget." A pause. Then, voice low, "That so?" I grabbed my drink, turned, and leaned against the counter, mirroring him. But I didn't answer, didn't blink, just let the moment stretch. Let him feel it, and judging by the way his fingers tightened around his glass, he felt it. A muscle ticked in his jaw, like he was fighting something, like he was still pretending this wasn't happening. So I tilted my head, lowered my voice. "Something wrong?" He exhaled through his nose, shook his head, then barely above a whisper, "You have no idea what you're doing." I arched a brow. "Oh, I think I do." His eyes flickered, like he wanted to challenge that, push back, but instead, he took a slow sip of his drink, held my gaze the whole damn time. And that was all the confirmation I needed. We didn't talk for a while after that. Didn't need to, because the tension, the thick, unrelenting weight of it spoke for itself. It was in the way he watched me over his glass, in the way his chest rose and fell just a little too fast, in the way his fingers tapped once, twice against the counter, like he was thinking, debating, deciding. And when he finally set his drink down, when he finally moved, I already knew what was coming. "Come with me." His voice was quiet, low, the kind of low that got under my skin, that settled in my chest, warm and dangerous. I swallowed hard, held his gaze, and instead of answering, I followed. He led me outside, past the crowd, past the neon glow of the signs overhead, and into the alley behind the bar. Dim, quiet, private. Then, finally, he turned to me, expression unreadable, hands flexing at his sides like he was still trying to convince himself this was a bad idea. Like he was still fighting it. So I stepped closer, bridged the gap, felt the heat rolling off his skin. And when I murmured, "You gonna frisk me again, officer?" his whole body went still. His jaw clenched, his breath hitched, and then he grabbed me, fisted his hands in my shirt, slammed me back against the brick wall hard, rough like he'd been holding this in for too damn long. When he finally spoke, when he whispered against my lips, his voice was wrecked, raw, like he wasn't pretending anymore. Like this was real now. "You're gonna be the end of me." His breath was ragged, his grip on my shirt tight, like he was still trying to hold himself back, still trying to pretend he had any control. Lied, but he didn't. Not anymore. Because whatever this was, it already had him. Just like it had me. His forehead rested against mine, not soft, not gentle, just there, like he needed the contact, like he needed me. And when he exhaled, voice low, wrecked, "I can't do this." I swallowed hard. "Then why are you still here?" His jaw clenched, his hands twitched on my chest, like he wanted to push me away, like he wanted to pull me closer. And then he laughed, quiet, bitter. "I have no idea." I smirked. "Liar." His eyes snapped to mine. Sharp, dangerous. But beneath that, beneath the tension, the frustration, there was something else, something he wasn't ready to name, something I wanted to rip out of him. So I pushed. "You want me?" A pause, a single second where I saw it. The truth, the war in his head. And then he turned away, gritting his teeth, shaking his head, like if he didn't say it, it wouldn't be real. But I wasn't letting him off the hook. Not now. So I leaned in, dropped my voice, and said, "Say it." He sucked in a breath, didn't look at me, didn't move, and for a second, I thought, maybe he wouldn't. Maybe he'd just walk away, pretend like this never happened, like he didn't just drag me out here, put his hands on me, look at me like I was the only thing keeping him standing. But then, he broke. The word came out strained, like it had been locked inside him for too long, like he didn't know what to do with it now that it was out. And then, finally, he looked at me, and there it was, raw, unfiltered, unmistakable. "I want you." Something inside me snapped. I grabbed his face, felt the scruff on his jaw, the heat of his skin. His breath shuddered, and then, I kissed him. Hard, messy, like we were both past the point of no return. Like we'd been waiting too damn long for this. His fingers dug into my waist, pulling me closer, his body pressed against mine, all heat and tension and raw, unspoken need. And when I bit his lower lip, he groaned, deep, rough, like I just set something off inside him. And maybe I had, because the second I did, he lost it. He grabbed my wrists, pinned them to the wall, pressed in close, and when he tilted his head, deepening the kiss, I knew. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about him, about finally letting go, about finally letting himself have this. And when he pulled back, breathless, panting, eyes dark with something I'd never seen before, I knew. He wasn't stopping now. We didn't speak, didn't move, just stood there, breathing hard, hands still gripping, bodies still too close, too tense, too much, because we both knew. There was no undoing this, no pretending, no taking it back, and judging by the way his chest rose and fell too fast, he knew it too. His hands were still on me, still pressing, still holding, like he wasn't ready to let go, like he wasn't sure he even could. His fingers flexed, once, twice, before finally, he exhaled, dropped his forehead to my shoulder, and in a voice so low I barely heard it, he whispered. I smirked, took my time, brushed my lips over his jaw, his ear, felt the way his body tensed, all over again. "You're really bad at denying things, officer." He laughed, short, breathless. Then, he pulled back, met my eyes, and for the first time since this whole thing started, he looked afraid, not of me, not of this, but of what it meant, of what he had just let happen, of how deep he had already fallen, because he had spent so long building walls, and I had just torn through every single one of them. He swallowed hard. I don't. He shook his head. I don't do this. I arched a brow. Too late for that. His jaw tightened. His hands twitched. And then, quieter. I mean it. I don't. I cut him off. Don't what? He didn't answer. Just stared at me, like he was waiting for me to figure it out. And maybe I already had. I exhaled, ran a hand through my hair. Then, carefully, like I was testing something, I said, "You've never been with a guy before." Silence. Stillness. Then finally, his throat bobbed, and barely above a whisper. No. Something tightened in my chest. Not because I was surprised. Not because I didn't already know. But because of the way he looked at me when he said it. Like he wasn't ashamed. Like he wasn't denying it. Like he was telling me. Because I was the first person he had ever wanted. Enough to admit it to. And that was something I wasn't prepared for. I took a slow step closer. Didn't touch him. Didn't push. Just waited. And when he didn't move, didn't pull back, didn't run, I asked, quietly, "Do you want to stop?" He inhaled sharply, like he had already made his decision. Like he had always known. And then, breathless, "No." The second he said it, I grabbed him, felt the way his body melted against mine. Like he was finally letting himself have this. Have me. And when he kissed me this time, slow, certain, desperate, I knew there was no going back. Now, I expected him to regret it, to pull away, to act like it never happened. Because that's what guys like him did, right? They hid, they pretended, they lied to themselves, until the truth disappeared. But he didn't. He didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't do anything, except stand there, breathing too hard, looking at me, like I was the first thing in his life that ever made sense. His hands tightened on my waist. His forehead pressed against mine. And when he exhaled, shaky, raw, he whispered, "What the hell am I supposed to do now?" I smiled. Small, soft, whatever you want. His jaw tensed. His fingers flexed against my sides. Like he was still getting used to the idea of touching me. Like he was still processing the fact that he could. And when he finally pulled back, when he finally met my gaze again, his blue eyes weren't scared anymore. They were certain. "I don't want this to be a one-time thing." He said it quietly, like he hadn't fully accepted it until the words were out. But once they were, there was no taking them back. Something inside me eased, because maybe I wasn't sure what this was yet. Maybe neither of us were. But at least we were figuring it out together. I reached for him, brushed my fingers along his wrist, felt the shudder that ran through him. And then, lowering my voice, I said, "Then don't let it be." His breath hitched, his grip on me tightened. And then, in a voice so low it barely reached the space between us, he whispered, "I won't." And just like that, it was done. The choice was made. The line was crossed. And when he kissed me again, slow, certain, like he was done running, I knew this wasn't just some mistake. This was just the beginning. Because sometimes, the things we run from the hardest are the things we need the most. But in the end, the truth always wins. And when it does, you just have to be brave enough to take it. Fire hooked? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because the best stories? They're the ones you never see coming.